9 Greatest Unsolved Mysteries Ever. There are many unsolved mysteries in life, even though science, technology, and research have come a very long way. Although we may demand logical explanations for these mysterious things, as of now we will have to settle with mere speculations. Until these mysteries are resolved, enjoy our 9 Greatest Unsolved Mysteries Ever. Which one is your favorite unsolved mystery? 1. Shepherd's Monument Inscription. In the grounds of Shugborough Hall in Staffordshire, England, sits an 18th century monument known as the Shepherd's Monument. The monument contains a relief, depicting a copy of a Nicholas Poussin painting, and a cipher text that has stumped historians and decoders for hundreds of years. What is the meaning of this outwardly simple, 10-letter text? Why was it carved onto the monument? Was it a declaration of undying love, a code to locate something, or a biblical reference? While the meaning of the Shugborough inscription has never been verified, there have been several theories as to what it means. The Shepherd's Monument was commissioned by Thomas Anson, a member of the British Parliament, and crafted sometime between 1748 and 1763 by Flemish sculptor Peter C. The monument consists of a relief of Poussin's painting, The Shepherds of Arcadia, which depicts a woman and 3 shepherds, with 2 shepherds pointing towards a tomb. Carved on the tomb is "Et in Arcadia ego," or "I am even in Arcadia" in Latin. The mysterious inscription that has yet to be decoded is located beneath the relief, and contains the letters OUOS, VAVV. Framing these 8 letters, at a slightly lower level, are the letters DM. So cryptic is the cipher text, that it became a feature in the international bestseller The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail by Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln, and Dan Brown's historical thriller, The Da Vinci Code. Both books presented the theory that Nicholas Poussin was a member of the secretive Priory of Sion, a medieval monastic order, and that his painting The Shepherds of Arcadia contains deep esoteric messages hidden within it. Several famous individuals have attempted to determine the meaning of the inscription, including Charles Darwin, Charles Dickens, and Josiah Wedgwood. Each of them failed to determine the purpose or meaning of the letters. Numerous theories have been put forward regarding the meaning of this cryptic message, none of which have been verified. Some of the interpretations are acrostic, trying to match each letter to the first letter of a word, while others are non-acrostic. The letters may have been a coded dedication to Admiral George Anson's deceased wife. In 1951, it was speculated that the letters stand for Optimi Uxorus Optimi Sororus Viduus Amantissimus Favit Virtutibus, or Best of Wives, Best of Sisters, a most devoted widower dedicates this to your virtues. The letters may represent the phrase Orator omnius sunt vanitas et vanitas vanitatum, or vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. All is vanity from Ecclesiastes 12:8. The letters may represent the inhabitants of Scarborough at the time the monument was constructed, namely Orgreave united with Overley and Shugborough, Viscount Anson Venables Vernon. The code may represent a number, in the form of Roman numerals. One individual has ascertained that the Roman numeral values of D, M, and the 3 verses equals 1515, possibly representing the year 1515. Further inspection of ancient variations of Roman numerals show that values can be assigned to every letter in the series, except U. This leads to a total of 1594, which is the year Nicholas Poussin was born. Another accounting of letters shows them adding to a sum of 2,810. This number may be significant, as Scarborough is 2,810 miles from the Money Pit on Oak Island, in Nova Scotia, Canada. One theory is that the letters Ausf are pronounced as Losf, referring to biblical prophet Joseph. A final theory is that the letters VV amount to 10, and the remaining letters are an anagram of devout Mason. One of the most popular beliefs, which emerged following the worldwide fascination with the Da Vinci Code and the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, is that the inscription encodes secrets relating to the Priory of Sion. Indeed, Pierre Plantard, founder of the French fraternal organization, adopted Et in Arcadia ego, which appears on both Nicholas Poussin's painting and the Shepherd's Monument, as the motto of both his family and the Priory of Sion. Proponents of this theory believe that decoding the inscription, supposedly Masonic symbols, would lead to the location of the Holy Grail. It is not clear whether the inscription will ever be decoded, nor whether it was ever intended to be. Whoever inscribed it must have known that the letters would last throughout the centuries, and be viewed by civilizations to come. It is possible that only a select few ever knew the purpose of the letters and what they stand for. So for now, the Shugborough inscription remains a mysterious puzzle for individuals to try to solve, though its true meaning may have already been lost to the pages of history. 2. Georgia Guidestones. In June of 1979, a man going by the pseudonym of R.C. Christian approached the Elberton Granite Finishing Company with the task of building a monument. He said that no one was to ever know his true identity or that of the group that he was representing. He seemed to have an endless supply of money to fund the project, and by the terms of the legal contract all plans had to be destroyed after completion, and all information about him withheld from the public. In 1980, the stones were finished. They carry a tablet in front proclaiming, "Let these be guidestones to an age of reason." Engraved in the stones are 10 guidelines meant to re-establish the planet and society, perhaps after an apocalypse. They are written in 8 different languages: English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese and Russian, and among other commandments preach to maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. Balance personal rights with social duties. Be not a cancer on the earth, leave room for nature. The Guidestones also serve as an astronomical calendar, and every day at noon the sun shines through an arrow hole in the structure and illuminates the day's date on an engraving. The names of 4 ancient languages are inscribed on the sides near the top: Babylonian cuneiform, Classical Greek, Sanskrit, and Egyptian hieroglyphics. Additionally, an instructional tablet at the site speaks of a time capsule buried underneath the surface, though the dates on which the capsule was buried and when it is to be reopened are missing. Whether this is intentional or the capsule was never buried is unknown. The Guidestones continue to be a point of controversy. Conspiracy theorists and fundamentalists believe them to be the work of Satanists or the New World Order, fueled particularly by certain commandments such as guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity, which can be ominously interpreted, and the Guidestones have been seriously vandalized by such conspiracy theorists. Others believe them to be a message of wise prophecy, possibly the work of an eccentric man of science. However, if the past 30 years are any indication, we may never know who built them besides what is engraved on the Guidestones itself. Sponsors: a small group of Americans who seek the age of reason. 3. Rongorongo. During the 19th century, ancient artifacts containing a set of etched symbols were discovered on the world-renowned Easter Island, a small remote island located a few thousand miles west of South America, and famous for the hundreds of giant monolithic anthropomorphic statues called moai. The intricate designs appear to be glyphs, or a form of writing, but the meaning of the glyphs has never been deciphered. Some believe that decoding the mysterious writing could offer answers into what caused the collapse of the ancient Easter Island civilization. The Rongorongo writing was first discovered by Eugene Earbaught, a lay friar of the Roman Catholic Church, who went to Easter Island as a missionary on January 2, 1864. In an account of his visit, he wrote of his discovery of 26 wooden tablets containing the unusual inscriptions. In every hut one finds wooden tablets or sticks covered in several sorts of hieroglyphic characters. They are depictions of animals unknown on the island, which the natives draw with sharp stones. Each figure has its own name, but the scant attention they pay to these tablets leads me to think that these characters, remnants of some primitive writing, are now for them a habitual practice which they keep without seeking its meaning. The name Rongorongo comes from the Rapa Nui language, which is the native language of Easter Island, and means to recite, to declaim, to chant out. The irregularly shaped wooden tablets were weathered, burned, or otherwise damaged when they were found. The glyphs were also found on a chieftain's staff, a birdman statuette, and 2 Reamir ornaments. The glyphs are written in between lines that run across the tablets. Some tablets are fluted with the inscriptions falling within the channels created by this fluting. The Rongorongo images are shaped like humans, animals, plants, and geometric forms. Every symbol that contains a head is oriented with the head facing up, and either facing forward, or profiling to the right. Each symbol is approximately 1 centimeter high. The orientation of the writing is read from left to right, bottom to top. This is known as reverse boustrophedon. According to oral tradition, the tools used to make the carvings were obsidian flakes or small shark teeth. The age of the tablets is unknown, as very little direct dating has been done, but they are believed to have originated around the 13th century, around the same time as forest clearing. However, this is merely speculative, as the inhabitants of Easter Island may have felled a small number of trees for the specific purpose of creating the wooden tablets. One glyph appears to resemble a palm tree, and is thought to be the Easter Island palm, which disappeared from the island's pollen record in 1650, suggesting the script must be at least that old. Deciphering the glyphs has proven difficult. Assuming that Rongorongo is writing, there are 3 barriers that make it difficult to decipher: the limited number of texts, the lack of illustrations and other contexts with which to understand them, and poor attestation of the old Rapa Nui language, which is likely to be the language reflected in the tablets. Some believe that the Rongorongo is not true writing, but proto-writing, which is a set of symbols that convey information without containing any truly linguistic content. According to the Atlas of Language, the Rongorongo was probably used as a memory aid or for decorative purposes, not for recording the Rapa Nui language of the islanders. While it remains unclear exactly what the Rongorongo is intended to convey, that discovery and inspection of the tablets remain an important key to understanding the past civilizations of Easter Island. The intricately inscribed, neatly lined images indicate that the ancient island civilization had a message to convey, whether it was a casual display for decorative purposes, or to pass messages and stories forward from generation to generation. Perhaps deciphering the codes will someday lead to answers about the collapse of the island civilization, but for now, the tablets remain a mysterious symbol from the past. 4. The Loch Ness Monster. There have been sightings of a mysterious creature lurking beneath the dark water of Loch Ness for hundreds of years, and the public remains hooked. It has been the subject of everything from high-tech sonar searches to Hollywood blockbuster films. So, what is the truth behind Nessie? The first sighting of the Loch Ness Monster is thought to have been recorded more than 600 years ago. Christian missionary Street Columbus spoke of chasing away a water monster as he traveled across the River Ness by boat. In the centuries that followed, there was often talk of everything from a mischievous water kelpie to water horses spotted crossing the loch. But it was during the 1930s that interest in Loch Ness, and any mysterious creature it might hold, really took off. In 1934, the world's most famous image of the Loch Ness Monster was published. Photographed by surgeon Kenneth Wilson, the image shows a dark-colored creature with what appears to be a long neck and head lifted out the water. Since then, more than 1,000 sightings of the monster have been reported at the loch, 23 miles long, a mile wide and 755 feet deep. It is the country's second biggest loch by surface area, after Loch Lomond, but, because it is so deep, holds the most water. Many commonly report seeing a multi-humped sea serpent, while others describe what they think looks like a plesiosaur, a long-necked creature from the early Jurassic period. One man who has spent the past 40 years studying Loch Ness and carrying out scientific experiments to see what lives beneath the water's surface is naturalist Adrian Shine. He has searched Loch Ness day and night in everything from a boat to a mini-submarine. And while he once caught sight of what he believed could be a water monster, he said he later realized he couldn't trust his own eyes after discovering it was a rock. Adrian said, "There are many people who genuinely believe they have seen something that could be the Loch Ness Monster. It could be what they have actually seen is a deer swimming across the water, or even a seal, as we now know that occasional seals do get into the loch most years. Others have perhaps seen a rock, or wood, or even waves caused by the wake of a boat that can all give the illusion of looking like something else. But what binds all these sightings together is the idea that there could be a monster out there. Most people don't believe there is a Jurassic Park-style monster in Loch Ness, but they still like to look, and the legend continues. The location of Loch Ness, so close to the Highland capital, fuels the legend, as so many people can go there to see the loch for themselves. In science nowadays, there are so many mysteries where often it is hard to understand the question, let alone the answer. But in the case of Loch Ness, we can all have an opinion on whether or not we think it might be scientifically possible that a creature we don't know, or don't expect to be living there, does actually live there. A lot of scientific work has been carried out on Loch Ness, which has led to many people saying this might be possible or that might happen because of this, but the truth is no scientist can prove that something isn't there. Amazing new images claiming to show the Loch Ness Monster have been captured on film and video. 5. Mackenzie Poltergeist in Greyfriars. Greyfriars Kirkyard is the site of one of the most bloody religious persecutions carried out in the 17th century by King-appointed Lord Advocate Sir George Mackenzie against the rebel Presbyterian Covenanters for their failure to accept state-approved religion and swear loyalty to the king. It is also the location of the most well-documented poltergeist activity in the world, the Mackenzie Poltergeist in Greyfriars. It all began 50 years after the National Covenant was signed, pledging to keep Scotland a Presbyterian country, when King Charles II descended the throne, and quickly disavowed the Covenanters' right to freely practice their religion, and demanded that all accept the new official state religion. On June 22, 1679, the king's forces swept the last of the Presbyterian Covenanters away in a bloody yet decisive battle known as the Bothwell Brig. Refusing to swear allegiance to the king, several thousand Presbyterian Covenanter rebels were rounded up and imprisoned in a section of the Greyfriars Kirkyard, the graveyard of the small Greyfriars Kirk parish, owned by the Church of Scotland, known as the Covenanters' Prison. Over the coming winter months, the Covenanter prisoners of war were branded dissidents, and subjected to deportation, inhumane torture, starvation, exposure and beheadings at the hands of Lord Advocate Sir George Mackenzie. Nicknamed Bloody Mackenzie by his victims, this vile brute was in charge of the Presbyterian Covenanter persecution on behalf of Charles II. And, though his everyday life facade was that of loving husband and father, legal scholar, published author, it's said he wrote the first Scottish novel, and well-read man, the private business of persecution that he conducted on behalf of the king was so well hidden that even his wife never saw this vicious and sadistic side. The persecution was relentless, and in the end, most if not all of the prisoners died and were buried in the Greyfriars Kirkyard cemetery where they had been held captive. In all, Mackenzie was responsible for the deaths of 18,000 of his countrymen in pursuit of a unified religion, during a period that was labeled the Killing Time. His bloody reign of terror came to an end in 1691 when he died and was ironically buried in a casket contained in the Black Mausoleum tomb, a building located on the Greyfriars Kirkyard, a short distance from the scene of his gruesome war crimes and where his victims were laid to rest. For 300 years, both victims and tormentor rested in an uneasy peace, just feet from each other. And then one dark and stormy night in 1998, a homeless man, possibly wanting shelter from the rain or looking for something valuable to steal, broke into the Black Mausoleum, a vaulted and well-fortified tomb, the final resting place of the infamous Bloody Mackenzie. The vagrant ransacked the tomb, smashing caskets on every level until he came to one which held the body of Bloody Mackenzie himself. While trying to pry open the casket, a large hole opened up in the floor under his feet, dropping the man into a chamber below. The pit was filled with the remains of plague victims, unceremoniously dumped into the hole and covered over during plague days as a quick way to dispose of bodies. Confronted by the putrefied remains and stench of still rotting flesh, the homeless man ran screaming hysterically from the mausoleum into the night, never to be heard from again. The next day, another passerby looking through the iron gates of Mackenzie's tomb was, in her own words, blasted back off its steps by a cold force. Sometime later, another woman was found near the tomb's entrance lying unconscious, and her neck covered with bruises as if someone had tried to choke the life from her. Had this homeless man awakened an angry spirit, to be let loose on a sleepy and unsuspecting burg? Once these stories of the macabre hit the internet, the legend of the Mackenzie Poltergeist in Greyfriars was born, and lit up the area like wildfire, attracting ghost hunters and macabre seekers from every corner of the earth. Since 1998, when Mackenzie's casket was first defiled, over 500 ghostly attacks have been reported by those visiting the tomb, many of these injuries documented with photographs. So far, documented injuries perpetrated by the Mackenzie ghost include burns, skin gouges around the neck and abdomen, unexplained bruises, broken fingers, feeling as if one's hair is being pulled. Some visitors have said they were punched or kicked by an invisible attacker while in the Mackenzie tomb. Others talk of feeling nausea or numbness, strange smells or auditory hallucinations such as wall and floor knocks, all having occurred with multiple witnesses present. Some even claimed the ghost had followed them back home or to a hotel. In 2000, Colin Grant, an exorcist and minister of a spiritualist church, performed an exorcism ceremony on the graveyard. Standing in the cemetery, it's said he was overcome by the sensation of being surrounded by hundreds of tormented souls, and evil spirits trying to break through to the mortal realm. Fearing for his own life, he left quickly, saying the evil was too powerful for him to overcome. A few weeks later, Colin Grant was found dead of a sudden and unexpected heart attack. Today, many people believe this graveyard is haunted by the Mackenzie Poltergeist, a malevolent spirit whose hatred lives on from beyond the grave. And, far from a restless or benevolent spirit, he exacts punishment on any who dare disturb his final resting place. 6. Black Dahlia Murder. Nicknamed the Black Dahlia, Elizabeth Short was born in Boston, Massachusetts, on July 29, 1924. 22 years later, Short, an aspiring actress, was brutally murdered in Los Angeles, California, her body cut in half and severely mutilated. Her body was found on January 15, 1947, in a vacant lot near Leimert Park. The Black Dahlia's killer was never found, making her murder one of the oldest cold case files in LA to date, as well as the city's most famous. Early life. Elizabeth Short, best known as the Black Dahlia, was born on July 29, 1924, in Boston, Massachusetts, the third of 5 daughters born to Cleo and Phoebe May Sawyer Short. Cleo Short abandoned the family when Elizabeth was 5 years old. At a young age, Short developed a strong affinity for cinema. By her teens, she had set her sights on becoming an actress. The Black Dahlia Murder. By the mid-1940s, Elizabeth Short was living in Los Angeles, California, working as a waitress to support herself while dreaming of catching her big break into Hollywood's acting scene. Her chance at stardom, however, would never come. In January 1947, a horrific tragedy occurred. At the age of 22, Short was brutally murdered in Los Angeles, her body cut in half and severely mutilated. Her body was found, nude and posed, by a local female resident on January 15, 1947, in a vacant lot near Leimert Park, on the 3800 block of L.A.'s South Norton Avenue. It was pretty gruesome, Brian Carr, a detective with the Los Angeles Police Department who has long worked on the Dahlia case, later said. "I just can't imagine someone doing that to another human being." In addition to dissecting and mutilating her body, Short's killer had drained her corpse of blood and scrubbed it clean. The case quickly became heavily covered by the media. Her moniker, Black Dahlia, became widely known shortly thereafter, as it was used more frequently than her real name by the press. The case itself took on a life of its own, Carr said. Early on, I think for 2 months it was front-page news in all the local papers every day. An in-depth, lengthy investigation by the LAPD ensued, leading to a number of false reports, including several false murder confessions, and ultimately leaving detectives grasping at straws. The sole witness of the murder had reported seeing a black sedan parked in the area in the early morning hours, but could provide police with little else. The combination of faulty witnesses and a lack of hard evidence surrounding the case greatly hindered its progress, and, despite numerous allegations and leads over the years, the Black Dahlia's killer was never found. Today, the Black Dahlia murder remains one of the oldest cold case files in LA, as well as the city's most famous. Recent case developments. In early 2013, the Black Dahlia case returned to the headlines. An article in the San Bernardino Sun detailed a more recent investigation of the case that was conducted by retired police sergeant Paul Dosty, author Steve Hodel, and a police dog named Buster with a keen sense of smell, specifically that of decomposing flesh, which he was trained to detect. According to the Sun, the investigative team has uncovered incriminating evidence against Hodel's father, Dr. George Hill Hodel, who the younger Hodel has long believed to be the Black Dahlia killer. In February 2013, the team conducted an extensive search of the doctor's home, where Buster had previously detected the scent of human decomposition in several areas of the basement, according to reports. Following their search, soil samples taken from Dr. Hodel's home were reportedly submitted for lab testing. Other evidence against George Hodel, according to his son, includes an old recording of a conversation between the doctor and an unknown person, during which Dr. Hodel allegedly stated, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead." 7. Shroud of Turin. Believed by many to be the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth, but held only as a religious article of historical significance by skeptics, the Shroud of Turin has captivated scholars and scientists alike due to its mysterious nature. New DNA tests add to the body of research that only serves to highlight the strange, unexplained origins of the shroud. The cloth, a pale sheet of woven fabric approximately 14 feet, 4.5 meters, long, might be considered unremarkable save for the distinctive reddish-brown markings on its front and back. The image of a prone man with hands folded can be made out on the cloth, with both the front and back views of the head meeting neatly at the middle of the sheet, suggesting it was folded over the front and back of a naked body in death. Countless horrible wounds to the body are revealed through the images on the fabric, from slashes to gouges, piercings and welts. These images strongly indicate to proponents the evidence of crucifixion and the biblical description of the death of Jesus. The hidden history of the shroud. Historical record can place the shroud in the late 1300s. Scholars debate its existence previous to 1390, describing the period before that as very murky territory. Even during the Middle Ages there was disagreement over authenticity of the cloth, with written claims at the time between church officials suggesting it was a forgery. However, historians raise the possibility that several such shrouds were making the rounds at the time, and forgery claims might have had nothing to do with the cloth found today in the cathedral in Turin, Italy. Since the 15th century, the existence of that shroud is well documented. It was deeded to the House of Savoy in Italy in 1453, and suffered damage in a fire. Patches and repair work have been done at various times on the artifact. It was set in a chapel in the 17th century, but it wasn't until 200 years later that it was put on public display, and first photographed. It was these photographs which elevated the cloth from relic to sensation. The photos were not remarkable in and of themselves, until viewed in the reverse negative, whereupon a detailed image of the wounded, bearded man became clearly visible. It had previously been suspected that the stains and images were painted on the linen by an artist at some point in its history, but the discovery of the detailed body image found embedded within the fabric drastically rewrote theories, and convinced many that the images were made through contact with an actual human corpse. Some Christians believe the image was transferred from Jesus' body onto the cloth with the release of divine light or energy upon his resurrection. If this was indeed the death shroud which encased the body of the historical Jesus of Nazareth, that would date the cloth to 30 AD, the biblical date of the death of Jesus. However, this dating is at odds with later historical record, as well as the modern scientific research on the artifact. Scientific examinations and bombshell revelations. A variety of tests have been carried out on the shroud since scientists were first allowed to examine it in 1969, including physical examinations, chemical analyses, and radiocarbon dating. Initial examinations led to the formation of an 11-member Turin Commission composed of scientists and advisors, and in 1977 the Shroud of Turin Research Project, STRP, was born. Their findings, based on a gamut of rigorous tests, were reported in 1981, stating, "We can conclude for now that the shroud image is that of a real human form of a scourged, crucified man. It is not the product of an artist." The bloodstains are composed of hemoglobin and also give a positive test for serum albumin. The image is an ongoing mystery, and until further chemical studies are made, perhaps by this group of scientists, or perhaps by some scientists in the future, the problem remains unsolved. 8. The Lost City of Atlantis. Atlantis is a legendary lost island subcontinent often idealized as an advanced, utopian society holding wisdom that could bring world peace. The idea of Atlantis has captivated dreamers, occultists and New Agers for generations. Unlike many legends whose origins have been lost in the mists of time, we know exactly when and where the story of Atlantis first appeared. The story was first told in two of Plato's dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, written about 330 BC. Though today Atlantis is often thought of as a peaceful utopia, the Atlantis that Plato described in his fable was very different. In his book Frauds, Myths and Mysteries, Science and Pseudoscience in Archaeology, McGraw-Hill, 2013, professor of archaeology Ken Fetter summarizes the story: a technologically sophisticated but morally bankrupt evil empire, Atlantis, attempts world domination by force. The only thing standing in its way is a relatively small group of spiritually pure, morally principled and incorruptible people, the ancient Athenians. Overcoming overwhelming odds, the Athenians are able to defeat their far more powerful adversary simply through the force of their spirit. Sound familiar? Plato's Atlantean dialogues are essentially an ancient Greek version of Star Wars. As propaganda, the Atlantis legend is more about the heroic Athens than a sunken civilization. If Atlantis really existed today and was found, its residents would probably try to kill and enslave us all. It's clear that Plato made up Atlantis as a plot device for his stories because there are no other records of it anywhere else in the world. There are many extant Greek texts. Surely someone else would have also mentioned, at least in passing, such a remarkable place. There is simply no evidence from any source that the legends about Atlantis existed before Plato wrote about it. Atlantis resurfaces. For most of the past 2 millennia, no one thought much about Atlantis. It was just what it appeared to be, a fictional place mentioned in a fable by the ancient Greek philosopher. The idea that Atlantis was an actual lost historical location is a very recent idea, first proposed by a writer named Ignatius Donnelly in 1881. He believed that most of the important accomplishments of the ancient world, such as metallurgy, agriculture, religion and language, must have come from Atlantis. In essence, he argued that ancient cultures weren't sophisticated enough to develop these things on their own, so they must have spread from some unknown advanced civilization. It is similar to the widely discredited ancient astronauts' idea that Egyptians were not smart enough to build pyramids, and thus extraterrestrials must have helped them. Later writers elaborated on Donnelly's theories, adding their own opinions and speculations. These included mystic Madame Blavatsky, In her 1888 book, The Secret Doctrine, and famous psychic Edgar Cayce in the 1920s and 1930s. Cayce, who put a fundamentalist Christian spin on the Atlantis story, gave psychic readings for thousands of people, many of whom, he claimed, had past lives in Atlantis. Unfortunately, none of the information was verifiable, and Cayce wrongly predicted that the continent would be discovered in 1969. Charles Berlitz, author of many popular books on the paranormal and unexplained phenomena, researched Atlantis and wrote a 1969 book titled The Mystery of Atlantis. Berlitz, whose family created the famous language learning courses, not only became convinced that Atlantis was real but also that it was the source of the Bermuda Triangle mystery, a subject he explored in his 1974 bestseller The Bermuda Triangle. Berlitz's wild ideas about the Bermuda Triangle, and, by extension, Atlantis, were definitively debunked the following year by researcher Larry Coase, author of the Bermuda Triangle mystery, Solved. Thousands of books, magazines and websites are devoted to Atlantis, and it remains a popular topic in New Age circles. The Lost Continent. Despite Atlantis' clear origin in fiction, many people over the centuries have claimed that there must be some truth behind the myths, and have speculated about where Atlantis would be found. Countless Atlantis experts have located the lost continent all around the world, based on the same set of facts. Candidate locations, each accompanied by their own peculiar sets of evidence and arguments, include the Atlantic Ocean, Antarctica, Bolivia, Turkey, Germany, Malta and the Caribbean. Plato, however, is crystal clear about where his Atlantis is, for the ocean there was at that time navigable, for in front of the mouth which you Greeks call, as you say, the Pillars of Heracles, that is, Hercules, there lay an island which was larger than Libya and Asia together. In other words, it lies in the Atlantic Ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules, that is, the Strait of Gibraltar, at the mouth of the Mediterranean. Yet it has never been found in the Atlantic, or anywhere else. No trace of Atlantis has ever been found, despite advances in oceanography and ocean floor mapping in past decades. For nearly 2 millennia, readers could be forgiven for suspecting that the vast depths might somehow hide a sunken city or continent. Though there remains much mystery at the bottom of the world's oceans, it is inconceivable that the world's oceanographers, submariners and deep-sea probes have somehow missed a landmass larger than Libya and Asia together. Furthermore, plate tectonics demonstrate that it's impossible for Atlantis to exist, as the continents have drifted and the seafloor has spread, not contracted, over time. There would simply be no place for Atlantis to sink into. As Canfeder noted, the geology is clear. There could have been no large land surface that then sank in the area where Plato places Atlantis. Together, modern archaeology and geology provide an unambiguous verdict: there was no Atlantic continent, there was no great civilization called Atlantis. Myth from misinterpretation. The only way to make a mystery out of Atlantis, and to assume that it was once a real place, is to ignore its obvious origins as a moral fable, and to change the details of Plato's story, claiming that he took license with the truth, either out of error or intent to deceive. With the addition, omission or misinterpretation of various details in Plato's work, nearly any proposed location can be made to fit his description. Science and science fiction writer L. Sprague de Camp thoroughly discredited the Atlantis story in his 1970 book, Lost Continents, the Atlantis theme in history, science, and literature, noting that you cannot change all the details of Plato's story, and still claim to have Plato's story. That is like saying the legendary King Arthur is really Cleopatra. All you have to do is to change Cleopatra's sex, nationality, period, temperament, moral character, and other details, and the resemblance becomes obvious. The Atlantis legend has been kept alive, fueled by the public's imagination and fascination with the idea of a hidden, long-lost utopia. Yet the lost city of Atlantis was never lost, it is where it always was, in Plato's books. 9. Lal Bahadur Shastri was India's third Prime Minister, Lal Bahadur Shastri, murdered. Officially, the diminutive leader died of a heart attack in a dacha in Tashkent, hours after he signed a peace agreement with the Pakistani president, Ayub Khan, on January 11, 1966, some 4 months after the end of the Second War between the two neighbors. But if you believe surviving members of Mr. Shastri's family, and an enthusiastic Delhi-based journalist, Mr. Shastri was possibly poisoned. What has added grist to the conspiracy mill is the Indian government's refusal to declassify a document it has in its possession pertaining to Mr. Shastri's death. In response to a right to information request by the enterprising Ainistar, a journalist and a self-proclaimed declassification enthusiast, the Prime Minister's office said that making public that document could harm foreign relations, cause disruption in the country and cause breach of parliamentary privileges. Totally non-controversial in his life, Mr. Shastri has become controversial in death. I did a little digging around, and found that most of the better-known accounts of Mr. Shastri's death have raised no doubts. Death by heart failure. In his magisterial India after Gandhi, historian Mackenzie writes Mr. Shastri died in his sleep of a heart attack. In her biography of Indira Gandhi, Catherine Frank writes that after he went to bed in the early hours of the 11th January, Mr. Shastri had a fatal heart attack. The most vivid account is in my dog-eared copy of the long-out-of-print book India, The Critical Years by veteran Indian journalist Kuldip Nayar. He was part of the Prime Minister's travelling press corps to Tashkent. Mr. Nayar writes that the Indian Prime Minister was already a heart patient, having suffered 2 attacks. He had had a hectic day, holding talks with the Russian Premier, Alexei Kosygin, the Russians having brokered the pact, and his officials, and had had very little sleep. That evening, writes Mr. Nayar, I met by chance his personal physician Dr. Arancha, who accompanied him. I asked him how Shastri was standing the strain. He looked up to the sky and said, "Everything is in the hands of God." Mr. Nayar does not elaborate. Mr. Nayar then proceeds to describe the fateful night in Agatha Christie-like detail. Since he was to travel in the Prime Minister's airplane early next morning to Kabul en route to Delhi, he retired to bed early an hour before midnight. I must have been dozing when someone knocked at my door and said, "Your Prime Minister is dying." A Russian lady was waking up all the journalists, writes Mr. Nayar. A group of journalists then sped to Mr. Shastri's dacha from the hotel. On arriving, Mr. Nayar found a grief-stricken Mr. Kosygin standing on the veranda. He could not speak and only lifted his hands to indicate Shastri was no more. When Mr. Nayar went in, he found Dr. Chow being questioned by a group of Soviet doctors through an interpreter. In the next room Mr. Shastri lay still on his bed. The journalists emptied the flower vases in the room and spread them on the Prime Minister's body. Mr. Nayar also noticed an overturned thermos flask on a dressing table some 10 feet away from Mr. Shastri's bed and wondered whether the Prime Minister had struggled to get to open it to get water. His slippers were neatly placed near the bed. It meant that he walked barefoot up to the dressing table in the carpeted room, Mr. Nayar writes. Mr. Nayar then pieces together the events leading up to Mr. Shastri's death, of how the Prime Minister reached the dacha around 10 p.m. after a reception, chatted with his personal staff and asked his cook Ramnath to bring him food which was prepared in the dacha by the Russians. It gets more interesting from here. In the kitchen there was a Soviet cook helped by 2 ladies, both from the Russian intelligence department, and they tasted everything, including water, before it was served to Mr. Shastri, Mr. Nayar writes. Remember, this was at the height of the Cold War and India-Pakistan hostilities, and the security paranoia was extreme. As Mr. Shastri tucked into a frugal spinach and potato curry meal, he received a call from a personal assistant in Delhi and sought the reaction to the Tashkent agreement back home. Then he spoke to his family in Delhi. He asked his eldest daughter, Kusan, about how she had found the peace pact. She replied, "We have not liked it," writes Mr. Nayar. He asked what about her mother? She too had not liked the declaration, was the reply given. A crestfallen Mr. Shastri, according to Mr. Nayar, then remarked, "If my own family has not liked it, What will the outsiders say? Mr. Nair writes that the Prime Minister's wife did not come on the line to talk despite many requests, a contention that is disputed by many of his surviving family members. This upset Mr. Shastri. He began pacing up and down the room. For one who had had 2 heart attacks earlier, the telephone conversation and the walking must have been a strain, he writes. Then his staff gave him milk and some water in the flask. Around 1:30 a.m., his personal assistant Sahib, according to Mr. Nair, saw Mr. Shastri at his door, asking with difficulty, "Where is the doctor?" The staff woke up Dr. Chow, while the Prime Minister's staff, assisted by Indian security men, helped Mr. Shastri walk back to his room. If it was a heart attack, myocardiac infarction, and obstruction of blood supply to the heart muscles, as the Soviet doctors said later, this walk, writes Mr. Nair, must have been fatal. Mr. Nair writes, presumably from an eyewitness account by the personal assistant, that Mr. Shastri began coughing rockingly, touched his chest and became unconscious. Dr. Cha arrived soon after, felt the Prime Minister's pulse, gave an injection into the heart, tried mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but to no avail. More doctors arrived. They found Mr. Shastri dead. The time of the death was 1:32 a.m. Talk about foul play began as soon as the body arrived in Delhi. Mr. Nair says the Prime Minister's wife asked him why Mr. Shastri's body had turned blue. He told her that when bodies are embalmed they turn blue. Mrs. Shastri was not convinced. She asked about certain cuts on Mr. Shastri's body. Mr. Nair told her he hadn't seen any. Apparently, she and others in the family suspected foul play, Mr. Nair writes. They still do. I went to meet Syarth Nath Singh, the Prime Minister's grandson and a senior member of the main opposition Bharatiya Janata Party, recently to hear the family side of the story. He told me that Mr. Nair's account of the telephone conversation that Mr. Shastri had with his family members that night was inaccurate, and that he had spoken to his wife. Mr. Singh, who was 2 years old when his grandfather died, says that one person was detained on suspicion of poisoning Mr. Shastri, but was released. Mr. Nair's book has no mention of this. Knowing the truth is important for our family. The truth has never been out, Mr. Singh told me. Then he talked about the Cold War politics of the day, and who would have gained from poisoning Mr. Shastri, who had served as Prime Minister for only 19 months, a foreign power, political rivals. Some of it sounds remotely credible, other bits outlandish. But Mr. Singh and the nation deserve to know why the government is holding the paper about Mr. Shastri's death back. How will it imperil our foreign relations? With whom? India has a notoriously stodgy reputation as far as declassifying historical documents is concerned. The state almost encourages a statist historiography. The truth should be out and the controversy should be buried, once for all.